Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Thomas Burr. I'm the Washington correspondent for the Salt Lake Tribune and the 109th president of the National Press Club. Our guest today is former Senator Bob Graham of Florida, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee before and after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. I would like to welcome our public radio and C-SPAN audiences, and I want to remind you can follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLive. That's NPCLive. We are now less than 2 weeks away from the 15th anniversary of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, which cost the lives of more than 3,000 Americans and launched America into war in 2 countries. Just last month, the United States government released 28 redacted pages of the Congressional Joint Inquiry into the 9/11 attacks. Our guest, Senator Graham, has repeatedly called for the release of those pages, and I'm guessing will argue today for more transparency into the worst terrorist attack on United States soil in its history. Senator Graham, who served 18 years in the Senate, is the co-author of America, the Owner's Manual. You Can Fight City Hall and Win. He is also a former 2-term governor of Florida. Since leaving the Senate in 2005, Graham has been the chair of the Congressional Commission on Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism, a member of the Congressional Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, and co-chair of the Presidential Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which I noted last night, actually, Senator, there's a picture of you from that news conference on the wall over there. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University of Florida and Harvard Law School, he established the Center for Public Service at the University of Florida to enhance civic engagement and prepare the next generation of public and civic leaders. Senator Graham will offer some remarks, and then we'll turn to questions. I'll call on you to ask your questions and ask you to identify yourself and your news outlet. You may also submit questions to questions@press.org. Once again, that's questions@press.org. Senator Graham, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burr, and thank you for the opportunity to come back to the National Press Club. As has been said, on July the 15th, after some 14 years, the chapter of 28 pages from the final report of the Congressional Joint Inquiry into 9/11 was released. I want to recognize the role that a number of American journalists have played in achieving this objective. I will just focus on a few, but there were many who continued to bring to the attention of the public that they did not have the full information as to what had transpired on one of the most horrific days in American history. Lucy Morgan of the Tampa Bay Times and Carl Hultz of the New York Times kept up a regular reflection on reminding people that these pages were missing and what their potential significance might be. Tony Summers and Dan Christensen, a journalist and blogger with the Florida Bulldog, broke the story on Sarasota, which I will discuss in a moment. And finally, Howard Rosenberg was the producer of the 60-minute segment, which in many ways was the end of the withholding of the 28 pages. The release of the 28 pages received a variety of interpretations. There were some who said that this confirmed the Saudi link to the 9/11 hijackers. The foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, Adel Jahib, said, "The matter is now finished, and the aspersions cast at Saudi Arabia for the last 14 years will end." I believe there's a different interpretation, and that is that this is removing the cork from the bottle, that there's a significant amount of information which, like the 28 pages, has been withheld, and that it was necessary to get this first block of material to the public in order to build the support that will be necessary for the balance of the material to flow. The unanswered questions still remain largely unanswered. Did these 19 people, most of whom did not speak English, most of whom had never been in the United States before, most of whom were not well educated, did they carry out this sophisticated task alone, or did they have some form of support while they were in the United States? If the answer is they had some support, who provided that support? A couple of contextual facts about the 28 pages. One, they were written in the fall of 2002. We know a lot more, even in spite of the stringent efforts to withhold, than we did in the fall of 2002. And second, most of the information in the 28 pages was derived from 3 of the 19 hijackers, the 3 who lived in San Diego. The other 16 hijackers lived across the country, primarily in places like Florida, Virginia, New Jersey. There were investigations conducted in each of those and other places, which have also been classified and withheld. Now that the bottle is open, what is likely to pour forth? I think there are 3 casks into which the liquid will flow. One is in the 28 pages were written in the fall of 2002, but were not, in a number of instances, completed. We were under a mandate to submit our final report before the end of that session of Congress, which meant by the end of December of 2002, and there were some issues that had not been taken fully to ground. As an example, the role of Prince Bandar, the long Saudi ambassador to the United States. In the 28 pages, it's disclosed that in the book of Abu Zubaydah, one of bin Laden's closest operatives, were the telephone numbers, which were otherwise unavailable, to Bandar's mansion in Aspen and to his bodyguard here in Washington. There was also information about the fact that both he and his wife had been involved in money transfers which appeared to go to the mentors and protectors of the 3 hijackers in San Diego. Was that where that money flow ended, or did it end up supporting the hijackers? That's the kind of questions which were raised in the 28 pages, but I hope that we will now get information to close those loops. Second, there has been a number of developments since December of 2002. In the fall of 2011, an author, Anthony Summers, and the journalist Dan Christensen disclosed the fact that there had been 3 of the hijackers who had lived for a period of time near Sarasota, Florida, while they were taking their flight training. These 3 included Mohammed Atta, who was thought to be the leader of the 19, and that while here, those 3 had significant contacts with a prominent Saudi family which left the United States after 6 years of residence in Sarasota for Saudi Arabia under what were described as urgent conditions. A new car left in front of the house, food in the refrigerator, clothes in the clothes washer. When that story was surfaced, the FBI's response was, in a public statement, that it had done a complete investigation of the situation in Sarasota, that it had found no connections between the hijackers and the prominent Saudi family, and that all that information had been made available to both the Congressional Joint Inquiry and the Citizens 9/11. I was able to quickly determine that the third statement was incorrect. We searched the records of both the 9/11 Commission and the Congressional Joint Inquiry, talked to the leadership and chief staff of those, and found that they had never received any information about the situation in Sarasota. I happened to have the opportunity to look at 2 of the investigative reports written by the FBI agent in charge of the 6 months investigation, and he said that there were many connections between the three hijackers and the Saudi family. And subsequently, in a released document through the Freedom of Information Act, that report is now publicly available with the statement that there were many connections. And second, that the investigation was not complete, that there were other leads that had been suggested by the agent in charge which were not pursued. I believe there are other examples of information like this that will be available when the investigative reports from places like Falls Church and Southeast Florida and Patterson, New Jersey become available. The third area, it will be judicial. The families of 9/11 have been litigating to try to establish the relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and entities and the 19 hijackers. Those efforts have been frustrated with the support of the U.S. Department of Justice and State, which has sided with the Saudis on this issue, but an interpretation of a 1970 sovereign immunity law has been effectively raised by the Saudis to not only cause there to be the dismissal of actions against the kingdom, but against many of the entities within Saudi Arabia. There is currently legislation in the Congress. It passed the United States Senate unanimously, which would provide an exception to that 1970s law in the circumstances similar to 9/11, where there was a alleged foreign government involvement with a terrorist organization that resulted in harm to Americans on U.S. soil. That matter is pending in the House of Representatives, and I hope that it will act during this session, ideally before the 15th anniversary of 9/11. The question is raised, why are you doing this? What, 15 years later, what difference does this make? Get a life. I was told that by the deputy director of the FBI. The answer, I think, is threefold. One is justice. These almost 3,000 American victims and their families deserve justice. They deserve the right in a court of law to be able to present the evidence that they have gathered, which is voluminous, that will link the kingdom and other entities of Saudi Arabia to the 19 hijackers. The second is national security. These are the facts. The Saudis have heard the message from the United States, including the defense that has been provided by two of its major executive agencies, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, to dismiss the suit against them. How have they interpreted those facts? I believe they have interpreted them as immunity. If the United States government won't take action in a case as serious and severe as this, that was, the word is overused, but was a transitional event in the history of the United States, what else will it take for Saudi Arabia to do before the United States government would be involved? And I think that the response that has come from that answer is we will continue to fund, as we have, the major terrorist organizations, and we will continue to fund mosques and madrasas, Saudi schools, which are training the next generation of terrorists. The two things that any terrorist organization depends upon is a consistent flow of money and recruits. Saudi Arabia is providing both of those. But I think the third reason why this is important is our democracy. There was a recent report from Dartmouth College of a study of what is the impact of secrecy, particularly focusing on the 28 pages, to the American people. And the answer is the result is cynicism and suspicion, that the American people are losing confidence that their government is abiding by the essential compact of democracy, that the people will give their respect to the government, and the government will give its respect to the people by letting them know what the government is doing in their name. This is not the only factor that's leading to a decline in citizen confidence in their government, and I think we are seeing it in full color in this presidential election. There are other factors, and one that relates to the book that Mr. Chris Hand and I have just published, is that Americans have lost the sense of their personal ability to affect government. When Benjamin Franklin walked out of the Constitutional Convention, a resident of Philadelphia asked the question, "Mr. Franklin, what have we got, a monarchy or a republic?" Franklin responded, "A republic if you can keep it." The fact that he and the founders gave us a republic is no assurance that we will always have it. I believe that one of the essential elements to retaining a republic is to retain the concept that the role of the citizen is central, that it is the citizen for whom the republic was established and for whom it will be accountable. Today, too many people are dropping out. We had an important election yesterday in Florida. The early reports are that less than 1 out of 3, maybe even less than 1 out of 4 people took the time to even vote. Much less are people getting actively involved. We are developing a democracy of spectators who think that their role is to sit in the stands and watch the game of democracy, not be a direct participant. I believe our democracy is in trouble until people begin to feel that they have a personal ability to affect change. This book, America the Owner's Manual, lays out dozens of examples of where citizens have actually gotten involved and made a difference. They didn't have to just rely on electing the right person to office. They did it themselves. And it provides the skills that are necessary in order to be an effective citizen. So I believe that the linkage between the cynicism of government by its people and the suggestion that one of the ways to overcome that cynicism is to motivate and provide the skills for the citizens not to be passive but to be active participants in their democracy is one of the most important anecdotes. Thank you very much. I again appreciate the opportunity to return to the National Press Club, and we'll be happy to answer questions except from Larry Lippman, who asked nasty questions, which I can certify to for many years. Yes.
Thank you, Senator. I think this is on. We're good? Of course, sir. Do you want to grab that water? I've been drinking it. This is working? There we go. Technology. We'll get there. Almost there? There we go. Thank you, Senator. So we're going to turn to Q&A now. A couple rules. Again, please identify yourself and your news outlet when asking the questions. I will stop you if you start to give a speech versus asking a question. But let me start off with a couple, if you don't mind. Sorry, Bob, 1 second. Let me start off with this one, sir. You allude to this quite often in your speech, but is the United States government protecting Saudi Arabia, and why?
Yes, it is protecting Saudi Arabia, and I think the reasons have varied over the 15 years of that protection. I think one of the key reasons early on was that President Bush said at the site of the World Trade Center that we will follow these heinous people to the ends of the earth to bring justice for those who have lost their lives. We immediately decided the ends of the earth were Iraq. It was rather embarrassing then to have information flowing in to the intelligence agency that actually Iraq didn't have anything to do with 9/11, but it appeared as if Saudi Arabia had a lot to do. So how do you square that difficult circle? I think the way, in part, was to submerge and suppress the information about the Saudi involvement. I think another factor is the long relationship that the United States has had with Saudi Arabia, going back to Franklin Roosevelt and his agreement with King Saud that we would provide them security, they would provide us oil. That relationship has been a difficult marriage to enter into a serious discussion as to whether maybe separation or divorce is going to be required. I think another reason more recently has been all the turmoil in the Middle East and the idea we've got enough disturbance in places like Syria and Iraq that we don't need to add another one in Saudi Arabia. I believe that, to go back to the marriage example, that the way that marriages or any human relationships remain strong is honesty, that you share with each other and you work through the difficult times. I think this is one of those times with our relationship with Saudi Arabia. We're not going to have a positive, fruitful relationship with a country in which there is heavy suspicion that they were a facilitator in this horrific event against our people.
I'll follow up with one more question for you, sir. It took 14 years for the United States government to release 28 pages, 28 redacted pages. How confident are you the United States government is going to release thousands of more pages of investigatory material when it took 14 years for 28 pages?
Well, we'll have a test this afternoon and tomorrow, and that is how much news comes out of this press conference that will point out that the 28 pages were not the end, as the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia has said, but it's just a opening to massive amounts of additional information. To give you one example, going back to that Sarasota case, after the FBI had released that statement that there were no connections, the investigation was complete, they turned over information about this, then there were a series of Freedom of Information Act initiated. And incidentally, I learned one thing throughout this. Have any of you been involved in a Freedom of Information Act? Okay. Well, I think the law should be amended. And the amendment should be to require that at the time you file your Freedom of Information, you also have to file a certified statement from an actuary as to what your life expectancy is. It is just incredible, the tactics of delay and obfuscation that make the ultimate objective of letting the American people know what their government is doing become reality. But let me just use the Sarasota case. The first response by the FBI to the Freedom of Information Act was, oh, we're protecting privacy. We can't release these 28 pages. Well, the judge asked the obvious question. The hijackers are all dead. The Saudi family's back in Riyadh. Whose privacy are we protecting? The FBI didn't have a very good answer to that, so he rejected that argument for non-release. Then the second defense was, well, we don't have any records. We conducted a 6-month investigation, interviewed scores, if not hundreds of people, collected many documents, but we didn't write anything down. Well, that was so absurd that the judge rejected that, and so sheepishly, on the third round, the FBI came into his office with 80,000 pages that they said, this is the Sarasota investigation. This one judge with a couple of young clerks down in Fort Lauderdale now has had this as his roommate, these boxes, for over 2 years. I'm hopeful that soon, to answer your question, he's going to begin the process of releasing the documents and building on the drumbeat that will come out of this press conference. With that hard information, that the case will begin to move forward again.
Well, as someone who has a FOIA probably outstanding for 4 or 5 years, I completely understand your point, sir. So I'm going to go to questions now again. So we have a microphone passing around, so please wait for the microphone because we are live on C-SPAN. Mr. Weeder?
Okay, Tommy, thank you for hosting this forum, and Senator Graham, thanks and congratulations for what you're doing and insisting that the facts on 9/11 come out. As you pointed out, and as the media pointed out, the 28 pages and credible media reporting that there were meetings, there were facts here, not just myths and wondering, but facts. In San Diego, the meetings by the Saudi Director of Religious Affairs with at least 3 of the hijackers, and 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, and there was money paid from Prince Bandar's account. Those are the facts. But it just seems that the American policy is to hide and to obfuscate. Why? I want to follow up on Tommy's question. Why would Saudi Arabia and the United States government not admit they had a problem and then go forward from the basis of honesty and say, now we are fighting terrorism together? And is it a matter of Democrats and Republicans alike just want to pander to Saudi Arabia? So what I don't understand is the reason why we don't take the facts and move from there, because these are the facts.
Well, I thought I had answered that question earlier, but I will add that, no, this is not a partisan issue. In fact, in the House, the effort to pass this JASTA legislation that will modify the sovereign immunity defense, and prior to that, a resolution urging the president to release the 28 pages, was led by a Republican, Walter Jones from North Carolina, and a Democrat, Stephen Lynch from Massachusetts. This has had strong bipartisan support. If anything, it's more of an executive branch versus the people of America. It's been the executive branch through not only justice and state, but Treasury and the intelligence agencies that have largely been the barrier to allowing this information to be known by the American people. And let the American people then form a judgment. What do they think we ought to be doing in this relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Next question. Hold on for the microphone, if you would. And please identify yourself and your news outlet.
Sure. Jeff Steinberg, Executive Intelligence Review. Senator, former Navy Secretary John Lehman, who was a commissioner on the 9/11 Commission, told 60 Minutes back in April that there really never was a complete investigation by the 9/11 Commission, and you've already said that the joint inquiry was limited by time and resources. Now, 15 years later, we have the 28 pages. As you just indicated, there's lots of facts in there. There was a 47-page report written at the beginning of the 9/11 Commission by the 2 people on your staff who were following up on the Saudi leads. They listed 22 Saudi officials who had direct contacts with just the San Diego hijackers. What do you envision as the next step? Can there be a new investigation without the time restrictions and other problems? And do you support that? And how would you envision moving forward from here, in addition to the lawsuit, which we do hope will be reinstated against the Saudis for discovery?
Well, in addition to the request of the National Archives to release who are the custodians of the Citizens 9/11 papers, to release those sections of its report which have been withheld, which relate to following up on the leads that are in the 28 pages. So we could ask, in those pages, is there a chapter about Prince Bandar that pursues the leads that were outlined in the 28 pages? That's going to be one. Second, will have to be more Freedom of Information Act. Is there anyone here who's under the age of 40 and has a chance to be around with the FBI and the CIA? Another thing would be the president. I can understand why George Bush acted the way he did. I cannot understand why Barack Obama is acting the way he is. This information is going to be known, whether it's in 2016 or 2026 or 36 or 46. It will, like the Pentagon Papers and all of these other old scandals, eventually it's going to come out. And I think that the legacy of Barack Obama is going to be stained by when the people recognize how much information was under his control, that he made the executive decision to continue to restrict from the American people. So those are, I think, the principal levers. They all eventually come to the American people. The American people care about knowing what their government did in this particularly egregious action? And if so, will they put enough political pressure? The political candidates they were both leaning towards releasing the 28 pages had they continued to be sequestered. Maybe now they should be asked a different set of questions. I'm not intending to do your journalism for you, but if you are the next president, will you release this other information for which the 28 pages are the indicator but not the last word?
Well, Senator, can I follow up on that real fast? You have endorsed Secretary Clinton. Have you made it a part of your endorsement or conversations with the campaign to focus exactly on this issue and said, I will endorse you if you'll do this, or are you pressing your campaign to make that point?
Well, the answer is I am pressing that point. I would have to say, given the choice that we're going to have on November the 8th, there's hardly anything that would be a strong enough restraint against the other candidate to vote for Donald Trump. So that wouldn't, I could in all honesty say, even if she answered it the way I didn't want her to do it, that I would not support and vote for her.
I understand. Thank you, sir. I think Andrew has a question here in the middle.
Andrew Craig, Justice Integrity Project. Senator, you've mentioned that a few moments ago, if the American public puts enough pressure, maybe good things will happen on this issue. Probably your book addresses how, but I wonder if you could say to the audience listening on C-SPAN and elsewhere, what can an individual do based on your extensive knowledge of politics to make something happen on an issue like this? What practical steps should or could somebody do?
The most immediate thing is to contact your member of Congress and urge he or she to vote for JASTA. That bill has had a roller coaster existence over the last 4 or 5 years. It seems to be closer to reaching its destination today than at any time during that long period. And the key is going to be, will the House take it up? My daughter happens to be a member of the U.S. House, Gwen Graham from the 2nd Congressional District of Florida. And I asked her about this, and she says that since the 28 pages were released, they've been getting more and more mail and emails and other contacts from constituents in support of JASTA. That's where the pressure needs to be until that important task is accomplished.
Another question here in the second row.
Yeah.
Hello, Jason Fordham here, as an independent journalist today. If there was involvement by the Saudi government, what is the motive? Obviously we've seen a huge mobilization by the U.S. government against terrorism and really brought the issue of Islamic extremism to the forefront. What is the reason they might have participated in this?
And we're asking that question in the time frame of September 11th, 2001 and the period preceding that. Some of this was laid out in a recent article by, I think, a Mr. Shane of the New York Times on the history of the Saudi kingdom and what its motivations are. I think the underlying objective of the Saudi kingdom is survival. They come out of a desert tradition of antagonism at a tribal level, and that still is a permeating concern. I believe that after the 1990s first Persian Gulf War, that the Saudis felt very threatened, legitimately, because Saddam Hussein probably, had he moved more quickly, could have successfully invaded Saudi Arabia. And they felt that their relationship with the United States had been compromised because the United States had actually been, previous to the invasion, been assisting Iraq in its military combat with Iran. And so they were looking for other sources of defense. One of the things they did was start buying military supplies from particularly the British rather than from the United States. And I think the one, and this is a speculation, that bin Laden, who had been exiled from Saudi Arabia, had gone to Afghanistan, had been a major figure in the rejection of the Soviet Union from Afghanistan, and had put together an army of 30,000 war-hardened troops, went to the kingdom and threatened civil insurrection unless it would help him in a plot. And I'm not suggesting that he necessarily gave the details, but it was clear that he wanted to do something big in the United States that was going to be adverse to U.S. interest and needed help. The Saudis had people in the United States who had the capacity to render help, people like Bayoumi, the man in San Diego, and possibly this family or associates of this family in Sarasota. We don't know that yet. And they agreed to make these people available. I think but again, that's speculation. I think if this information is released, the information that is available not just on 3 but on all 19 of the hijackers, that will have a better and more fact-based answer to your question.
If you could pass the mic down, actually, Mark has a question in the middle of the room.
Thank you. Mark Meredith, WFLA NBC Tampa. Question for you. You mentioned you felt stonewalled even by the Deputy Director of the FBI. Did you ever feel like your life was at risk, or was your security ever a concern for you as you've kind of pursued this over the last few years?
No, I never felt that, but I was disappointed that it appeared as if the FBI was moving from a cover-up, which I consider to be a passive withholding of information, to aggressive deception. In the case of Sarasota, which is one of several examples, they rewrote the narrative. They said, we finished the investigation and we have found no connections, when in their own files, written by their special agent, who was from the Tampa office, incidentally, they had contrary information. And they then, and have continued, to withhold that information, other than the 80,000 pages, from the public. I consider that to justify the categorization of being aggressive deception.
A question on the front row.
Hi, Christina Wong with The Hill. What is the mechanism for release of the investigations on the other hijackers? Are there FOIAs out? And why is the FBI? Why would the FBI suppress those investigations? And what role can the families or are the families playing?
You asked several questions. If I don't answer all of them, ask. I think the reason that the FBI is doing it is, one, it's not doing it on its own. The pattern of behavior from the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, the Justice Department, the Treasury Department, has all been consistent. I think the message has gone out from the White House that we do not want any information relative to Saudi Arabia to be released. There was a very interesting and important book written several years ago by Phil, he was with the New York Times, Schilling, yeah, who wrote a book about the investigation into 9/11, and he pointed out the number of times when information about the Saudis' role was aggressively suppressed. So this is not a new or unique to the FBI venture. Yeah.
And you think it started with the Bush?
Sorry, wait for the mic if you could, just for the broadcast.
Sorry. And do you believe that, you mentioned coming out from the White House, did it start with the Bush White House and then it just continued to the Obama White House?
Yes.
And then the questions before, have those reports on the other hijackers been FOIA'd, and what's
Yeah.
the mechanism for release?
Yes, I know because I'm involved with it in Florida that have been FOIA'd in Sarasota and Southeast Florida, where incidentally 13 of the 19 hijackers spent most of their time in the United States in Southeast Florida. We got enough issues. Don't take that into account as to where you're going to take your next vacation. I assume they have all left by now. And I'm not sure whether a FOIA has been filed in Falls Church, which incidentally is not far from here if somebody would like to take that one on, or Patterson, New Jersey, which were two of the other places where numbers of hijackers lived for significant periods of time.
And lastly, what role are the families playing in getting increasing public pressure?
Well,
on
their primary role is to secure passage of the legislation which will allow them to proceed with their litigation. There's very, very able law firms involved in this matter. I'm aware of much of the investigative work that they have already done. I think that will be, of all the channels of information about the Saudi role, what's going to come out in that litigation, if it is allowed to occur because the sovereign immunity defense has been modified, will be astounding.
I'm going to go to the young lady in the back here.
Hi, Munira Almoud with Canal Plus French TV. Thank you, Senator. So I have two questions. The first one is there any other channel that you're using? Are you in contact with any group, like for instance, WikiLeaks, or any other organization that will bring, be able to help that issue be more public in a more scandalous way so that people really are forced to read and act on that? And the second question is, so you are asking for the House to vote on JASTA, and you are asking them to allow American families to be able to sue a foreign government in U.S. court, correct? So
Correct.
how confident are you that this will not open the door for other governments to sue the United States and to ask for reparations for other things that, they've done?
Well, let me answer the two questions. First, you used the word channels. I will state I have not contacted and will not contact WikiLeaks to assist to secure release this information. I think the American government needs to do it, not in a subterranean manner. I might say one thing that has impressed me is how much interest there is internationally in this. To my knowledge, because I have participated in some of the production, there are programs. ITV, the British principal commercial station, is going to air a documentary on this subject during the week of September the 11th. There's been a French and German documentary that has developed. In the case the German has been produced, and the Australians are developing a very deep documentary on the whole suppression of information on 9/11. So the support is becoming international, because this really is an international. Saudi Arabia has not just engaged itself in U.S. matters. Going back to that New York Times article of last week, they have had a very negative impact on making Islam a much more rigid and reactionary religion in places like Western Europe and Indonesia and Pakistan than it had been in the past. Your second question was, yeah. Yeah, I know that's a defense or an argument against JASTA that's raised. One of the frustrations here is there is another channel, and it has been used many occasions. There's been some news coverage recently of the event that occurred 25 years ago when a Pan Am jet was blown up over Lockerbie, Scotland. The families, the victims, did not go to court to get compensation. They went to their government, and their government went to the Libyan government and negotiated a settlement of some $2.5 billion, which was then distributed among the families of the victims. Both through two administrations, there has been an unwillingness to negotiate with Saudi Arabia and say, here's what we know was your involvement. Do you want to enter into diplomacy to determine the appropriate compensation of these American families? The answer is we've refused to do so. And the reason that I've been given is because the relationship is too important to even suggest to them that they might have been involved. Well, I think it's a little presumptuous for the U.S. government to say, on the one hand, to these families, we won't enter into diplomacy like we did in Lockerbie on behalf of the families, the victims, but on this same while we will aggressively resist your ability to use our court system as a means of getting justice. So I find that argument to be very unsatisfying.
Senator, can I follow up real fast on something a minute ago about Secretary Clinton? Are you concerned about anything that came out about her emails, and do you feel there are a lot of emails from Secretary Clinton involving Saudi Arabia that have not been released?
Well, of course, the easy answer is I don't know the second question. The first question, it's hard for me to believe, as one who for 10 years had fairly open access to a lot of classified information, that any Secretary of State would have either, certainly not knowingly, but even by inadvertence, assisted in making classified information available. And apparently the documents that flowed through her computer, with only a few exceptions, did not have any indication on them that they were in fact considered to be classified by the sender. I think, to use her words, this was an act of bad judgment by Mrs. Clinton. She should not have done this, but I don't think it's a national security threat or that she should be criminally indicted for this.
I think we had a question in the back.
Thank you. I'll stay low for the cameras. Manny Roppolo with RT America. Thank you, Senator Graham. You mentioned your experience dealing with the FBI and trying to get more information about the Saudi connection. Have you been in contact with anyone, any officials in Saudi Arabia, and if so, what's been the outcome of that inquiry?
Some of the answer to your question I can't discuss publicly. I did go to Riyadh in 2011 or 12 and had some conversations on this issue at that time, both with Saudi and U.S. persons. There was some information that I got that I think tended to be reinforcing of my belief that there was a relationship, but I can't go beyond that.
Next question. I think Celia here in the front row had a question. Hang on, Celia, here, the microphone, please.
Hi, Celia Wexler, Who, What, Why. We're an online news organization. A couple of questions. One is I want to be clear about what you're saying about Saudi involvement. Do you believe that Saudi involvement is at the highest level of their government, or is it Saudi officials, or Saudi individuals, or all three?
Again, that's precisely the kind of information that is knowable, just it's not knowable to anybody outside of a very small group of people in the agencies who have control of the information. My own belief is that it involves layers of the Saudi society, in part because of the nature of the Saudi society. The Saudi society is a medieval monarchy where the king can literally do no wrong, and other entities within that kingdom are reticent to act, particularly on something that would be as sensitive as being duplicitous to your closest ally without some signal of clearance. I think there's an interesting part of the suits to date against Saudi Arabia. I mentioned that it's not just the kingdom that was listed as a defendant, but also a long list of other Saudi entities, banks, foundations, non-governmental organizations. They have also claimed the same sovereign immunity that the king has claimed, and the courts have accepted that. That tells me that the assumption is that every institution, from the palace to the back office of a financial institution, Saudi Arabia, is considered to be worthy of the protection of sovereign immunity, which says that they must in some way be responsive to the kingdom which holds that sovereign immunity.
And just one follow-up. You were pretty much harassed by the FBI when you tried to go further in your inquiries. Since you went public, have you heard of anybody else who had that kind of treatment from the FBI?
No. And this was a situation which occurred in 2011 as all this information about Sarasota was starting to come out. My wife and I flew up from Miami to Dulles to have Thanksgiving with our daughter who lives in Great Falls, and we were met at the airport by two FBI agents, and they said that we have that an official of the FBI wants to talk with you about the Sarasota situation. Well, I was encouraged, feeling that maybe some of the questions that we'd been asking were now going to be answered. So we drove with the two agents to the office at Dulles, which the FBI has. My wife was put in one room, and she was given as entertainment the FBI training manual. And if you want to know some arcane aspects of FBI training, she's fully prepared. I was taken into another room with the deputy director of the FBI, a young female FBI agent, and a middle-aged lawyer from the Department of Justice. And essentially the message was, we've done this complete investigation, everything that's known is known, and you need to get a life. I pointed out what he didn't know is that I had actually read two of the investigative reports by their agent, which contradicted what they had said publicly and what he had just said to me privately. And he said, "Oh, you don't understand. One, that wasn't a very good agent." Well, the idea that has there been an investigation by the FBI in its history that was as important to the American people as full knowledge of 9/11? And the very fact that they would say they sent to head an investigation into what I think was an important component of the total picture, someone that they declared to be less than a fully capable person, was itself revelatory. Then he proceeded to say, and we have other information that puts what you read in context, and you will see that, in fact, what we have said is true. So I said, fine, could I see the information that will put it into context? And he pointed to the young female agent and directed her to assemble the files, and we arranged a time to meet at the FBI office for the District of Columbia. So a few days later, I showed up for our meeting, prepared to read these files, and the deputy director was there, and he said, the meeting is canceled, and we're not going to reschedule it. And since I knew who the agent was that had been described as less than competent, and I had called him to try to have a telephone conversation. And he said, and I know you've been calling Agent X. Stop calling him because I've told him to not take your calls. And that was the last of any official character meeting that I had with the FBI.
All right, we have time for about 2 more quick questions. You two are next. The gentleman in the white shirt behind you, and then I'll go back to you. Could you pass the mic, please?
My name is Khalil Bentouila. I work with Al Hura TV station, which is a U.S. station based here. It's in Arabic language. So my question is a transmission of a question that a lot of people in the Middle East are asking. Especially these people are the moderate people, the anti-Wahhabism people, the anti-Sharia people. They are asking the question, can we say that the U.S. are sacrificing the 9/11 cause and its dignity as a superpower in order to keep oil supplied in the energy market, and also to keep the $7 billion in the American banks and avoid any other economic crisis in the future? This is why the Americans are dealing peacefully with the Saudi.
Well, if those kinds of questions are being asked in the Middle East by people who you've described as being constructive, non-violent individuals, that just underscores that releasing this information, which would provide answers to questions like that, and not just personal speculation, is not only important for the American people, it's important for our global reputation. And I can't answer those questions other than to the degree I have speculated on it earlier. And I think it's important for the American reputation. Maybe this comes under that category of our national security. People respect us to be honest with what we know about the relationship of Saudi Arabia to the 9/11 and begin that serious discussion of what's our future going to be in terms of the relationship.
Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Earl. I'm a communicator with the National Press Club, a member. And I lost my godson in the 9/11 attack in New York. My question is, the 9/11 attack was really the second attack on the World Trade Center. In 1993, a Saudi-connected and funded terrorist group bombed in the parking garage of the World Trade Center. So my question is, shouldn't the look back really be to the complacency of the U.S. government going back as far as 1993 and then leading up to 9/11?
As a general proposition, I would say yes. And in fact, there were some ties, because one of the two people who were identified as being the principal protectors of the 3 people in San Diego was a man named Basnan, who had been peripherally involved in that first attack back in 1993. There may be some evidence from that as to the relationship of Saudi Arabia to the perpetrators of that event, which might start the trail of information that would lead to their involvement in 9/11. Again, that's the kind of information which an open discussion with materials that have been withheld, made available, could possibly answer.
All right, a couple quick announcements before I ask the last question. I'd like to remind you about a few upcoming programs. On September 8th, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut will discuss his efforts to secure new gun control legislation. Also that day, National Republican Congressional Committee Chairman Greg Walden will be here to discuss efforts to keep and build on the GOP House majority in the time of Donald Trump. And on September 15th, Defense Secretary Ash Carter will speak here at the National Press Club. And so my last question to you, before we go to book signing, by the way, which I think we'll do in the room next door. The senator has a few minutes to sign some of his books. But as the former chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, what do you think of Donald Trump now receiving classified briefings?
I think it not only is in the tradition of recent years, but it's very valuable that a person not show up on the first day of the job as President of the United States ignorant about what the conditions in the world that affect the security of the United States might be. As you might recall, when Harry Truman suddenly became president on the death of Franklin Roosevelt, apparently he didn't even know that the atomic bomb was under development. He was a fast learner, but we, in the complex world in which we live today, having a person assume that ultimate commander-in-chief responsibility, ignorant of the conditions that were then operative, I think would be very much adverse to our national security. So I'm pleased that he is receiving these briefings and assuming that he will be careful and treat them for the sensitivity that they represent.
Makes sense. Thank you, Senator. The book is America, the Owner's Manual. You can fight City Hall and win. The Senator will be signing them next door. Thank you very much, sir.
Good. The only